When you do games critique on the regular, you'll see so many similar games that it's very easy for everything to start blending together into one unremarkable whole. You go a place, you rub some items together, plot happens, same old story. So when I discover a game which does something even slightly different, it's rather difficult not to give it special treatment. Rather than try to combat this in any meaningful way, I've instead assembled a list of 8 adventure games which did something different. Couple of quick runners up before we get started. I thought about putting Discworld or the goddamn Orion Conspiracy on here for adopting a full screen minimal HUD interface, but that pretty much became the standard before long. And there's Thimbleweed Park's admittedly unique method of solving the final puzzle, which was to make you look outside the game itself. Specifically the game's original Kickstarter video. Unique to be sure, but pretty rubbish if you don't have a reasonable internet connection or perfect memory handy. And while not everything on this list will result in a net positive, it was a bit much. Anyway, on with the show. Number 1 sends us back to the early days of point-and-click adventures with Maniac Mansion and its multiple protagonists. Not only that, but you get to choose 2 of them, each with a unique skill, to accompany Dave, who can do bugger all. This was pretty rare for video games as a whole back then, let alone for the adventure game genre. Add in the fact that the game can be completed with any combination of kids, assuming you don't get them all locked up or killed, all done in a way that fit into 64 kilobytes of memory, and it forever associated Ron Gilbert with the phrase, talented bastard. Number 2 builds on the previous entry by looking at an aspect of the game design and thinking, but what if more? Rather than rely on the player to decipher what demented train of logic the developer was on at the time, cough Discworld cough, Indiana Jones and the Fate of Atlantis offers 3 distinct ways to proceed through the game. The chatty chummy mouth words route, the brainy thinky puzzle solving route, or the use fist on man not in that way route. You do get locked into whatever path you pick, which is a shame, but that's because each path has unique encounters and challenges. If you like the game, it could be worth replaying to see where those paths take you. Then again, the fighting minigame is like playing whack-a-mole while suffering from severe oxygen deprivation, so maybe not. Number 3 is a small change with some interesting consequences. Many design choices of the genre can fall under the rather dangerous banner of "we've always done it this way." And while some are done the way they are for a very good reason, some would benefit from being questioned. Clearly this was on the mind of the Brotherhood when they made STASIS, which, rather than presenting item descriptions when an item is explicitly clicked on, the game presents them when you hover the mouse cursor over the hotspot. You get all the information that item examination would give you without having to click, making it easier to scan a room at speed. The same technique was used to particularly good effect in Unavowed. If your companions decide to have some banter, which they do at random intervals, it prevents that from being interrupted because you right-clicked on a lamppost. Also, your protagonist doesn't appear to have a working speech centre, so it plays into that as well. Number 4 has its crosshair set on what's seen as a core strength of point-and-clicks. There's a few games that have dabbled with ditching dialogue to differing degrees. Some have their characters making sound effects instead of speech, some made their translations completely incomprehensible, but only one I can think of where the number of readable words in the entire game can be counted on one hand. Dropsy has all communication take place with icons and character reactions, which the game's cartoon aesthetic depicts with hyperbolic glee. It's not just for the sake of being different either, it helps emphasise that the main character is an outsider, as if this is his best interpretation of what the people are saying. Plus it must save a lot on translation costs. Number 5 attempts to solve a trope or stereotype of the genre, that being the use every item on everything else approach that certain levels of moon logic will force you into. A bit like trying to find a system option after a Windows 10 update, Resonance provides you with a short-term memory bank. You can place the memory of any item in there and use it anywhere else on anything else to discover a connection. Essentially, it makes the possibilities so vast that if you don't at least narrow it down, that brute force approach is going to take you years. Whilst unique and in the puzzle-solving spirit of the genre, I can't help but liken this to fixing the needle in a haystack problem by adding more haystacks. Number 6 doesn't attempt to curb our item rubbing ways so much as it does offer an alternative. Discworld Noir brought us the Notebook, a collection of clues, suspects and, well, notes to aid our favourite private investigator on the whole of the disc. He's also the only private investigator on the disc, so that's kind of a given. You can examine clues to get a recap, combine clues to discover connections, and use the clues as topics of conversation when interrogating the various boulder-faced characters. The real genius behind this technique, however, is the fact that it's really just another inventory system with a fancy hat on. You really do feel like a detective though, so that ain't nothing. And completing the trilogy of things in this list that relate to inventory in some way, we have number 7. We've already seen 2 attempts to keep the urge of mindless item rubbing at bay, but this one is the nuclear option. ditching the inventory entirely. Mind you, when your first example came out in 1990, it's questionable to claim that it was bucking any trends. LOOM begins with young Bobbin Threadbare holding nothing but a magic staff, and all that changes throughout the game are the spells he can cast with it. That's all you'll do: walk, talk and magic. The only complication comes when you have to cast some spells backwards for the opposite effect. But it turns out that's enough to get you through the whole story. Could have still done without that limited vision maze, however. You can see this idea as recently as Lamplight City, where the meat of the game is shifted over to conversation and decision making, and the use of objects is sparse and pretty much automatic. Of course, this is the game that says it's okay to fail, so tread lightly. Now to end on something a little different. Have you ever wondered exactly what the best way to double your workload is? Number 8 has the answer: scene duality, creating two versions of every screen that the player can switch between in some fashion. Standout examples include the Silent Age and Fran Bow, although it's done in different ways. Silent Age has you travelling between pre- and post-disaster timelines, whereas Fran Bow has the protagonist take a pill to see the world in a different way. It's left unclear which, if any, is the real world, but I would like to live in the one with less blood on the walls, thank you please. This opens up a lot of puzzle opportunities. A path could be blocked in one version and clear in another. A change in one version could trigger a change in the other, especially if it's time travel. And if you need a bit of variety, you can take away the ability to switch between them, raise the stakes a little. Depends precisely how far up the wall you want to drive your designer, but it does provide a lot of possibilities. So that's a thing I did. Thanks for watching all of it. Let me know what you'd put on a list like this. Feel free to like, dislike, subscribe, unsubscribe and comment as you wish. And if you'd like to support my work in a monetary fashion, I have a Patreon you can pledge to. Thanks again, have a good one.